The WNBA is facing one of the most important moments in its modern history. And this time, the biggest action is not happening on the court. It is happening behind closed doors at negotiating tables, where league officials and the Women's National Basketball Players Association are trying to reach a new collective bargaining agreement before the pressure becomes even harder to contain. What makes the situation so serious is not only how long the talks have dragged on, but when they're happening. The league is finally enjoying major momentum. Fan interest is rising, expansion is moving forward, and new stars are drawing attention at a level the WNBA has wanted for years. Now, all of that growth is running straight into a labor standoff that could affect free agency, expansion teams, and even the next draft. An emergency meeting has now become part of the conversation after the two sides missed their own deadline to finalize a deal. That alone tells you how tense things are getting. Negotiations have stretched well beyond what anyone hoped, and this has reportedly become the longest labor dispute in WNBA history. The previous agreement already expired, and temporary extensions bought both sides extra time to keep working. But extra time does not always produce extra progress. It simply delays the consequences. And right now, those consequences are no longer hypothetical. They are starting to show up all over the league's offseason. The most immediate problem is free agency. More than 100 players are currently sitting in limbo because teams do not yet know what the new financial system will look like under the next agreement. Until the salary cap structure is finalized, front offices cannot move normally. They do not know how much room they will have, what new contracts should look like, or how to build rosters with any real confidence. So the market is effectively frozen at a time when players should be making decisions and teams should be shaping their next season. For a league trying to build excitement and keep attention flowing year-round, that is a major problem. And it does not stop there. Expansion is also being affected. The WNBA has already confirmed incoming franchises, including Portland and Toronto, which should be a huge reason for celebration. Expansion is supposed to signal ambition, health, and a bright future. But expansion teams cannot move cleanly into place if the framework around roster protections and player allocation remains unsettled. Expansion drafts depend on rules, and those rules are tied directly to the next labor agreement. So even one of the league's biggest growth projects is now stuck waiting for labor negotiations to catch up. Then there is the draft. On paper, the league calendar keeps moving, and the upcoming WNBA draft is supposed to be another major moment. But drafts do not exist in a vacuum. They are tied to roster rules, contract structures, and the broader system teams are operating under. If the agreement is not settled in time, the uncertainty around the draft only grows. That is why this situation has become so much bigger than a routine negotiation. It is not just about numbers on paper anymore. It is about whether the entire offseason can function properly. According to reporting around the talks, both sides have continued exchanging new proposals in recent days, which at least suggests that discussions are still active and not completely broken. But the lack of public detail also shows how sensitive the process has become. When negotiations enter this stage, every piece of movement matters, but so does every sign of distance. And right now, the biggest reality is that no final breakthrough has happened yet. What makes the timing so delicate is that the WNBA is negotiating from a position it has spent years trying to reach. The league is not having these talks during a quiet period. It is having them during a surge. Over the past 2 seasons, the WNBA has experienced a sharp rise in visibility. National television ratings have improved in a major way. Attendance has climbed. Teams have seen larger crowds and more consistent attention. The league has felt more present in mainstream sports conversation than it has in a long time. This is exactly when you want the spotlight to stay on growth, competition, and star power. Instead, part of that spotlight is now shifting to labor tension. A huge part of that recent popularity has come from a new wave of attention around the league stars. Caitlin Clark arrived carrying massive hype from college basketball and immediately became one of the most watched players in the sport. At the same time, established elite names like Aya Wilson and Breanna Stewart have continued to define the league at the highest level. That combination matters. The WNBA is no longer relying on only one kind of audience or one type of star. It has young viewers coming in, longtime fans staying engaged, and a broader public finally paying closer attention to women's basketball in a way that feels sustainable. That is exactly why these negotiations carry so much weight. When a league starts growing this quickly, the conversation around money changes. Players naturally begin asking harder questions about compensation, revenue sharing, benefits, and long-term security. Growth creates excitement, but it also raises expectations. If the business side of the sport is improving, then players want that reflected in the agreement that governs their careers. From their perspective, this is the moment to push. And from the league side, there is pressure to protect expansion, stability, and continued investment. That is why these talks matter so much. They are not happening in a stagnant environment. They are happening when both sides know the league is gaining value. Several players have already spoken publicly about the stakes, and their comments reflect both caution and seriousness. Kelsey Plum has warned that a strike could damage the sport, which is a point a lot of people around the league understand. Momentum is hard to build and easy to lose. If the WNBA starts disrupting its own progress during one of its most promising periods, the cost could go far beyond one missed deadline. Caitlin Clark has also made it clear that compromise is going to be necessary, which is probably the most realistic summary of the entire moment. No agreement of this size gets done without both sides giving something up. And Breanna Stewart, one of the strongest voices in the union, has indicated she is prepared to stay at the table until a deal is reached. That says a lot about how seriously the players are taking this process. The phrase that seems to echo around the league right now is that there has to be give and take. That may sound simple, but it is actually the heart of the issue. The players know this moment matters. The league knows this moment matters. Everyone understands that the WNBA is in a more powerful position than it was years ago. The disagreement is likely about how that progress should now be reflected in structure, pay, and future planning. That is where labor talks become difficult. Both sides can agree that the league is growing and still disagree deeply on what fairness looks like in practice. Fans are watching all of this closely, and not just because they are curious about contracts. WNBA fans have become deeply invested in the future direction of the league. They see the attendance numbers, the television growth, the incoming expansion teams, and the cultural attention around players. They understand that this is a turning point. So when labor talks start threatening free agency and off-season movement, people notice immediately. It changes the mood. Instead of excitement around signings and roster building, fans are left refreshing updates about negotiations. That kind of uncertainty can be dangerous during a growth period. Sports business analysts have long pointed out that labor disputes feel especially risky when a league is beginning to accelerate. If momentum is already fragile, any interruption can slow down the connection with new fans. Casual viewers who just started paying attention may not stay invested through confusion and delay. That is one reason the current dispute matters beyond the players and executives directly involved. It could influence how strong the WNBA's current wave of popularity remains over the next year or two. There is also a symbolic side to all of this. The WNBA has spent years fighting for stronger visibility, better financial conditions, and wider respect in the sports world. Now that it is finally enjoying a more powerful position, the labor fight becomes a test of what that progress actually means. If the players feel the business is growing, they want the agreement to reflect that reality. If the league wants to continue expanding, it needs a system that remains financially workable. In that sense, this is not just a negotiation over one season. It is a negotiation over what kind of league the WNBA is becoming. That is why the emergency meeting feels so important. It represents another attempt to prevent the off-season from sliding further into uncertainty. It is a chance to narrow the gap before deadlines start becoming real problems instead of theoretical concerns. Free agency needs clarity. Expansion teams need rules. The draft needs structure. And the league itself needs a deal that allows the conversation to move back toward basketball instead of labor instability. Still, there is no guarantee that one meeting solves everything. Long negotiations often reach moments that feel urgent, only to continue dragging afterward. The fact that this dispute has already gone on this long suggests that the remaining differences are not minor. When both sides miss a deadline they set for themselves, it usually means the hardest issues are still unresolved. That is why nobody around the league seems fully comfortable right now. Even if talks are continuing, the players are in a complicated position too. They understand their leverage may be strongest during a time of growth. They also understand that pushing too hard and triggering a strike could create real damage. That tension is what makes labor disputes so emotionally and politically difficult. Players want to secure a better future, but they do not want to be blamed for hurting the sport's momentum. The league, meanwhile, wants to avoid appearing rigid at the very moment it should be celebrating success. Neither side wants to lose the public relations battle, but neither side wants to compromise too cheaply either. So the next phase of these talks matters enormously. If both sides can make progress quickly, the off-season may still recover without lasting disruption. Free agency could open up properly. Expansion logistics could move forward. The draft could stay on track. And the WNBA could continue building on its strongest growth period in years. But if the stalemate continues, the league may start paying a price in uncertainty, delay, and lost momentum just when it can least afford it. That is what makes this such a critical moment. This is not a background business issue hiding behind the basketball. Right now, this is the basketball business issue. The future shape of free agency, the rollout of new teams, and the organization of the next draft all depend on what happens in these negotiations. And beyond those immediate concerns, there's a bigger question hanging over everything. Can the WNBA turn a period of popularity into long-term structural progress without damaging its own rise and process? That answer will not come from highlights or headlines alone. It will come from whether the league and the union can find enough common ground to get this agreement done. For now, the conversations continue. The tension keeps building.